hello everyone. Welcome to the Dobbin House. It's so great to have you here, and I'm grateful that you're here. Start out with a newspaper article that took place 40 years ago. I presented this same idea, the same program, to the Adams County Historical Society. So if any of you were at that program and you think, oh no, it's going to be the same thing. Well, I added a few things, so you'll find it interesting. This is a little idea of the items, the uses of the Dobbin House over the years. What I did for this presentation was go through basically hundreds of slides and photographs to put this program together. And gosh, it brought back so many memories. But I had to pick just a couple to put into this slideshow. So basically what I did was I took old pictures and pictures from when I purchased the house in 1976, then some pictures or one or two of the reconstruction, and then into what it looks like today. So that's kind of the outline of what we're going to be looking at. So Tim talked about the house over the years, and this is one of the oldest pictures, of course, that we have of the Dobbin House, and wish we had some from back in 1776. But this, here again, you can see the barn, and that had the sharpshooters in it during the Battle of Gettysburg. The house is over here, but I have a little bit better picture of it. This is about 1880s. And by this time it was owned by Henry Heck, and at this point it was not used by the owner. So the owner just rented it out to other people, which was actually good for me because as a landlord, these people didn't want to put a lot of money into the Dobbin House. So they left a lot of the original structure over the years. It was altered later, but a lot of it was original, which was very fortunate. You don't usually find that in old houses. By 1905, the Dobbin House was famous enough to have a postcard made of it and was sold to the public. Interesting, though, that it's the back of the Dobbin House, not the front. I don't understand that one. But go ahead about another 20 years. Oh, here it's owned by a Kate Nixon. And I don't think she took very good care of the Dobbin House, because here it is later when she owns it. You can see she let the ivy grow up to the roof. It's falling off. The roof doesn't look like it's in very good shape. So she didn't, again, do much to the house, but that was actually a good thing for me. So move ahead to 1941, and John Lippy buys the house. And he looks at it and he says, God, there's so much original texture to this house. I think I'll make it into a museum. So he gets a lot of antiques. He puts them in the house. People can go in and pay out some money, and they walk through the house looking at the antiques to make it look something like it did when Reverend Dobbin lived here back in 1776. So this John Lippy took a few interior shots of the Dobbin House, and we have those photographs. So I'll be showing you some of those. Move forward to the 50s, and a Curvin Hess purchased the house because he has created a diorama. So it's still a museum, but he puts this diorama in. It's about 4,000 little lead toy soldiers on kind of a miniature railroad display. A tape came on and told you about the Battle of Gettysburg and so forth. And he was capitalizing on the tourism that was growing in the 1950s in Gettysburg. So now we come to 1976. This is the first photograph that I took, and this is how I found the Dobbin House. Now, this is looking at the east side of the house, and you'll notice that up on the top, the original roof line was between the two chimneys. When Reverend Dobbin lived here, it was just this basic colonial Georgian style house, and the tax records say that it had an adjoining kitchen and spring. That's this little first floor over here. This section was added on later. Now you'll notice the beautiful red tin roof, and you'll also see that where the diorama was, because all the second floor windows are blocked off. That's where the toy soldiers are. The shutters are gone, and it has a paved parking lot. So if you're Reverend Dobbin and you're going to build a house like the Dobbin House, the first thing you do is go out in the woods and cut down some hardwood trees and make the frame timber for the house. So these I took up in the attic in 1976, and you can see this huge timbers that make up the Dobbin House frame. They used what they called a mortise and tenon joint, and once they have the logs put together, they drill a hole through the two pieces and then put a peg in, and that joint is not moving anywhere. And that's one of the reasons why the Dobbin House is so well preserved and stands so proudly and strong today, is because of the workmanship, the craftsmanship that they had back then was just amazing. Now for the rafters in the right picture, that's also a mortise and tenon joint that is put together right at the very tip of the rafter. But it was kind of hard to create that joint way up high in the sky, so they actually did the work for the joint on the ground. And they thought, well, you know, we're going to have to figure out which joists go together. So it's a little hard to see in this picture, so I blew it up for you. Each of these rafters have a Roman numeral on them, on both sides. So here, I hope you can read this. It's Roman numeral 8, and it adjoined with the other side, which is again Roman numeral 8. And they just put it together. They put the peg up in the top, and they have the roof line. And of course here you can also see the beautiful tin roof. This is the south side of the house. And here you can see, first of all, the door to the kitchen and a little window. That window was right over top of the spring, so that when Mrs. Dobbin went down to get her water, she would have some light so she could see what she was doing. And this, here it's very clear to see the addition that was added. I've been told that it was probably added about 1810. And that kind of coincides with Reverend Dobbin's death in 1809. It was probably his son Matthew, who inherited the house, who created this second floor. But it's interesting here that you can see that the repointing of the stone here, whoever did it did a really lousy job, because you can very clearly see that this one story had a gable roof on the top. And it's hard to see here, but there was actually a little window in that gable roof, so they would have had some winding steps going up and could have stored things on the second floor. Now, in Reverend Dobbin's inventory taken upon his death, it mentioned that he had built a brickyard business on his property. So Matthew took some of the bricks that they were making, and he put the gable end in bricks. A fella came to the Dobbin House in about the 1880s. He was a Presbyterian minister, and he was writing an article about the Covenanters, which is what Reverend Dobbin was. And he talks about how on the southern side of the house, you could see that the house was scarred by bullets and balls and shells. And if you look closely, you can actually see some indentations in these bricks. It's kind of hard to tell on the stones, but you can see it in the bricks. So we're thinking that that might have been from damage during the Battle of Gettysburg. Now moving to the back of the house, which is the west side, you first of all have the back door over here, and then there are two little windows, or two little doors, I should say, over here. This one goes right down into the basement. And as Reverend Dobbin was also a farmer, it listed on his inventory that he grew all kinds of crops. In the barn that you saw the picture of, he had all kinds of farm animals. And I'm thinking that they would have taken the crops at harvest time and taken them down into the basement via that little window or door over there to store the root vegetables that would stay nice and fresh down in the basement. This little door, which is a bigger picture of over here, was right over top of the spring. And Reverend Dobbin put that in so his neighbors could come over. They could put their bucket in down with a rope, scoop up a nice bucket of fresh spring water, it must have been pretty good, and take it home with them. And of course, that's why they built the Dobbin House where they did. It's over top of a really good spring. So Mrs. Dobbin would have indoor water, which was really nice. On the north side of the house, they had to put in a fire escape because it was a museum. So they took out some of the stones and had this iron fire escape. But I can't talk about the reconstruction of the house without talking about these four fellas. On the left there is Art Stabler. He was the architect. I would tell him what I wanted the house to look like. He drew it up so that we could go to the state of Pennsylvania for their regulations. And the next fellow over is Frank Auspitz. Frank Auspitz was like Mr. 18th century. He was a cabinet maker from York. And I was lucky enough to be able to go over to his cabinet shop one time, and it was so quiet because all of the work that he did, the beautiful furniture, and they just had an exhibit of his work over at the York Historical Society. It was all done by hand, just the way they did in the 18th century. And so he helped me so much to know what the Dobbin House would have looked like back in 1776. And he did replaced any woodwork that was missing. He made it, again, by hand in the old way and replaced it inside the Dobbin House. And these two fellows here are the Krause brothers. And they were contractors extraordinaire, definitely. Don Krause over here was just so wonderful at my telling him, this is what I want you to do. And he would look at me like, what? Are you crazy? And then he would do it. He was fantastic. And this is Alan. He did all the finishing work that you see at the Dobbin House. Alan did it. And I am so pleased that Alan is actually here tonight up here in the show. But again, brings back a lot of memories, doesn't it? And I also I can't go without thanking my parents. Oh, they were just so wonderful. Not only did they loan me money to do this work, But they were so supportive and encouraging along the way, not only restoring the Dobbin House, but also as opening it as a business. So I forever thank them, and I paid them back every penny with interest. So here is Don Kraus, and one of the first things that we found was that there was a moisture problem and some problems with the foundation of the Dobbin House. And here he is digging it up and getting ready to pour some concrete. One of the things that I'm positive with the Kraus brothers doing the work is that they were so interested in the preservation and the longevity of the Dobbin House. With the work that they did, I have no doubt whatsoever the Dobbin House is going to last another 200 years, to be sure. The windows of the Dobbin House were the originals. And you can see from the picture on the right, they were in terrible shape, and the wind was whistling right through them. So Frank Gospitz measured them, went back to his cabinet shop in New York, and he made handmade replacements for all the Dobbin House windows. He even had the old glass to put in, so that they're new windows, but they are made in the 18th century manner. The original windows are up in the attic of the Dobbin House. So someday if somebody says, who was that nut who took those windows out, they're very welcome to get them and put them back in. The masonry of the Dobbin House, as we go around the outside, you saw the ivy that was growing on the house. Well, of course, that eats the mortar away. The birds loved the Dobbin House. There were nests all through these rocks, but we knew that we had to repoint the house. And so here we are working on the repointing. First, we have the south side of the house over here to the left. And you can definitely see where that little gable window was at one time. On the north side of the house, you can see the fire escape door that had been put in, and the little gable window up in the corner, which is where the 55th Ohio soldiers went. Walt Howe in his books actually found the name of a soldier that was in that side of that window and had been shot and killed. But these fellas, these Union soldiers that were in the Dobbin House in no man's land, were shooting at the Confederate sharpshooters that were on the other side of town, in the little windows up in the attics too. And one of them was only about 6 houses away, called the Stock House. And this building still exists. You can definitely see from the damage that was done during the battle here, there must have been a Confederate sharpshooter up in that little window, and they were really trying to get it out. But some of those firings would have come from the Dobbin House attic and the rafters of the Dobbin House barn, just like Tim was talking about. For the west side of the house in the back, we added a kitchen. Now it started out from my research down at Williamsburg. I was going to have the kitchens in the basement, just like they have in all their taverns. But my mother went down in the basement and she saw the nice stone. She said, this would make a great room. Let's make this into a tavern. So in the picture on the left, you can see we didn't finish the end of the house. What the Krauses did was they built a ramp, and it's hard to see, but there's a little clam digger down there. That clam digger would go down that ramp, make a sharp right turn, go underneath the Dobbin House, and then dig out the dirt underneath the Dobbin House. And here's a pretty little girl sitting on the skidster. The Krauses called it a clam digger. I love that. I didn't do the work, I just posed for the picture. But they went down into the tavern, and they went to this good clay, Gettysburg clay dirt, and tried to lift up the dirt. Wouldn't even budge. So they welded teeth onto the end of the bucket of the skidster. Went up to the dirt, wouldn't even budge. They actually had to get a jackhammer and jackhammer the dirt loose first, just so they could scoop it up. And then, very, very carefully, the skidster would make a U-turn, turn around, go back out, up the ramp, and to the dump truck. Well, when they got to the dump truck, this mud, all this from the spring water down there, would make the dirt stick in the bucket. And the operator had to get a bucket, a shovel, and scoop it all out. I thought, we'll never get this done. And here's a picture on the left of the basement when we purchased the house. Now, it was a crawl space. Some places it was only about 2 feet deep, and other places 3 feet or 4 feet deep. And again, it's just mud underneath that. And this moisture was actually rotting the timbers above the Dobbin House. We didn't realize quite how bad the problem was at first. But on the picture on the right, you can see that we're starting to dig down. And you can see the water that's in where the skidster goes, and its tire marks. We had to build little gullies over, and then dig a hole and put a sump pump in, and we're constantly pumping the water out as we're trying to dig down. And here's Don over here. The whole time that we're digging, he's got to hold up this Dobbin House. So you can see he's got posts, he's got jump jacks, he's got cement blocks. He is doing his best to hold up this house. I'd go home every night and pray, please don't fall down, Dobbin House, doing this work. And you can also see the moisture, how it's getting to the beams up here. But finally, he got down to, he said, we're deep enough, and he's building a stone wall along the edge where we had dug down. And I said, oh, Don, can't you just put that stone wall underneath the original stone foundation? He said, Jackie, one thing you don't want to do is touch the dirt that's been underneath a house for 200 years, or you're going to have big, major problems. So I listened to him and said, go ahead with this ledge. If you go down into the tavern today, you'll see a ledge that goes all the way around the tavern, and that is put up against where we dug down. The stone above the ledge is, of course, the original foundation to the house. So finally, we've got the ledge, and we're down dark enough. There's Alan. He's doing some work back in the corner, probably repointing some of the stone work. And then we brought in stone and put that all along the basement. After that, we needed to put in cement. How do you get cement down in the tavern, down in the basement of this house? Well, Krause Brothers didn't stop them for a beat. They took out the window of the dining room, took out some floorboards of the dining room floor, and had the cement go right down, all the way down to the taverns.
That's great.
Worked great. So finally, we've got a cement floor. Oh, it took forever, but we got it. And the whole time we're thinking about how we're going to design a tavern down there, and have a tavern, you have to have a bar. So it was Wilbur Knox. He said, Jackie, I know where there is an antique bar close by. It was near Mechanicsburg in an antique shop. I went to see it, and I thought, oh, this guy is lovely. He's 17 feet long, hand-carved out of chestnut wood, and it was built in the early 1800s. So I said to the antique dealer, these things don't come along every day. Where did you ever find this? He told me that he had been to an auction, public sale. It was in Clear Springs, Pennsylvania. It's just on the other side of York Springs. And it was a general store that was going out of business. The general store was owned by the Dick family. I thought, oh my goodness, that could be my family's bar. But you would have been very proud of me. I didn't mention a word to him. This is an antique dealer. How much would you want for this thing? Gosh, well, I'd have to have at least $100. I'll take it. So here it is. I finally have an antique floor, and we're taking the bar down. Now, my grandfather went down into the tavern when we were all done. He recognized that bar from when he was in the general store when he was a young man, and he told me that this bar was built by my great-great-great-grandfather. So it's back in the family again. That's just thrilled to have it. So after the cement, we got busy putting down a brick floor, which is what we have down there today. And we had to cover up the logs that the Krause brothers really reinforced the ceiling logs above the tavern roof ceiling. And then they put pulpwood in, and we're putting up plaster on it. And they were making it nice and smooth and pretty. And I said, no, this has to be colonial. Oh, there was a lady who showed up, just a tourist, showed up at the front door one day. She said, what are you doing? I said, we're restoring the Dobbin House. Oh, she said, that's too bad. Pardon? She said, every house that I go in that's restored looks brand new. And it's lost its patina, it's lost its character. That lady, no idea who she is, but she doesn't know how much she influenced me. Because to this day, we've got to have the original character of the colonial period. So I got up on the ladder and I said, guys, here's how I want you to do it. And when I turned around, they were gone. So guess who did the ceiling down in the town? But here it is today, finished. And here you can see the bar, okay? Now this picture was taken in 1978. And these are two of the first servants that we had down there. And this is the same person on both here, put these two pictures together. That is Jan. And if you look over at the bar right now, you will see Jan at the Dobbin House. Couldn't do it without her, that's for sure. Thank you. So, we're moving on now to Mrs. Dobbin's kitchen. Now, this is one of the Lippy pictures that was taken in 1941, when it was a museum showing how it was in the colonial period. And here it is in 1976. That's my mother peeking around the corner. And I want you to notice there is a staircase here and also a wood floor. Well, we took up some of the wood floor and we noticed there were bricks underneath. So thought, oh, let's make it have a brick floor like it would have had in the colonial period. So this is a picture of us getting ready to pour cement, because you can't just put bricks on the ground. It would be wobbly, and this is going to be a public building. So we had to pour cement before we put bricks down. And, oh, here's the fire. Okay, I don't know if you remember, Alan, how cold that winter was. I really felt like the Dobbin family, we would all huddle in front of that fireplace all winter long. But here's the kitchen today, and I took some classes on fireplace cooking over at Landis Valley Farm Museum. So here was where we had a winter feast, and I'm doing some fireplace cooking on the fireplace. Okay, so in this picture, first of all, I want you to notice that when you walked over on the side of the kitchen into that doorway, you looked into the original spring. And that's also where you went to the restrooms for the museum. Oops. This is a doorway, and originally there would have been a winding staircase that would have gone up to that little gable attic above the kitchen. They took that out, or they took the middle steps out, and had these steps so that people could easily go up and look into this section, which it's purported, it's just, over the years, the Dobbin House has always been known as having a slave hideout to hide runaway slaves. Someday, I hope that I run into the ghost of Matthew Dobbin, who put that second floor on, because I would love to ask him, did you build that second story so that just so you could build this slave hideout? Or was it just something that happened because you wanted more room? So I guess I'll never know that. But in the 1976, you would walk up those stairs, look into this little slave hideout, and that's what you saw. So I thought, well, we can do better than that. I like the idea of visualization of what took place in there, so we changed it. And here we are during the restoration. And again, I showed you the bricks on the gable end when Matthew added this addition. This is actually an interior wall, and that he uses brick also. Here's we've restored the original steps, and here it is today. We've got the original steps, we've got the sliding shelf, which would hide whatever was concealed back there. And I went to Dorfman's in Baltimore. They're the folks who did all the wax figures for the wax museum that used to be up the street, and put in some figurines. So I mentioned that in 1976 you walked forward and you could see the original spring. On the left, what you did was you walked straight ahead and you looked down in a hole and you looked down at the water. And what Mrs. Dobbin would have done, there would have been a set of steps that would have gone from the kitchen straight down to that hole where she would scoop up the buckets of water, then carry those heavy buckets back up to the kitchen. Well, in 1977, during the restoration, we're digging the foundation for the kitchen in the back, and we found this log in the ground. And then we realized that this was a 1776 pipe that was put in to take the water from the spring underneath the Dobbin House out to the creek in back of the Dobbin House. Of course, it's no longer there, it's covered up by the road. But what they would do is they just hollowed out a log, and that was their pipe back then. Well, it was working perfectly well, so we covered it back up, and to this day, the water from the spring under the Dobbin House goes out that original log pipe and down out to the spring into the creek. So here's the spring area. Now, here's the first step from the kitchen. So Mrs. Dobbin would have walked down some very steep steps down to the spring, which is right under this stone slab, to get her water. And because we lowered the dirt down in the tavern, we had to build a new area for all the water to go. And then we have a sump pump, and that sump pump goes up these pipes out, and it goes into that log. And here it is when you have a little window and a door. So you look through today, and it's hard to see, that's all water. because that spring runs just as good today as it did back in 1776. And right under this board is that original log, and all the water just runs out from there. Over here we have the restrooms for the museum, and it was they were back a little hallway. Well, we needed a southern entrance to the tavern, so we just took up the floor, took off all this plaster that had been put over the stone, and created this staircase into the tavern that you see on the right. And that all that stonework is original to the house. Here's another Lippy picture of the dining room in 1941. Obviously, it was a museum at the time. He had cases with different artifacts in them. And here it is in 1976. Now, when the Dobbin House was made into a museum, they had taken out all the interior walls on the first floor and on the second floor. So, that was where the alterations began. If you go to the Dobbin House today, we have put back in all of those walls, all the woodwork. So now you walk in, there's a hallway, just like you would have done in 1776. So we got rid of all of the souvenirs and all the shelves. And here it is in 1977. You can see where the hole is in the floor, so we can get the cement down into the tavern. And here it is today. And the library, I don't have a very good picture of it, but this was also part of a gift shop back in at that time. Here we are restoring the house. And gosh, in the middle of the restoration, it looks so awful. Everything's all torn up, and but eventually it gets better. Now this is the other side of the room, and since it was called the library and Libby had it decorated like that, we continued to call it the library. Well, my mother talked to Frank Auspitz, and he said, "Oh, if I could make you some really nice library shelves over there." "Okay, fine," she said. I said, "Mother, you're adding more money to this project." But I'm glad she did, because here's how it looks today. Yeah. She had good taste. This is the parlor in 1941, the Lippy Museum. Here it is in 1976 when it was the gift shop, and they also had some cases with some guns and things in it. But I want to point out that over here, this is the original mantle, and there were two closet doors over here. One door is still there, the other one they had taken off and put in a heater. But luckily, they had kept that door, and it was up in the attic, so was able to get it with the original HL hinges on it. So we were able to put that closet door back. But over, just off the picture here on the left, there were two jump jacks. Of course, this is not what you notice when you're going through with the realtor. But Don and Alan looked at these jump jacks and said, "Oh, we've got problems here." So they took off some of the ceiling and found out that the main summer beam had totally cracked up there, and the house had sunk up on the second floor 6 to 8 inches. So they said, "Oh gosh, we're going to have to fix that if you really want the house to be maintained." So they got some jacks in, and they actually jacked up the house 6 to 8 inches. But this picture I wanted to show you, because here we've taken off those closet doors. They have gone to York, to Frank Auspitz's shop, to be restored. But I love the fact that you can see where there were shelves inside that closet. And I like to imagine Reverend Dobbin putting he had a school for young boys back then that would have been filled with school books for the young kids. Well, we jacked the house up, and unfortunately, it made all the plaster on the walls crack and fall off. And I was so sad about this, because this is the original horsehair plaster. And I thought, oh, can't we fix that? But there was no fixing it, because it was really falling off. So we had to replaster a lot of the walls, unfortunately. And we also had those 10 original fireplaces. We had 10 dampers made and put those into all the fireplaces so we could hold in the heat. And so here they are. I think they're in the study here, putting the damper in. And anywhere there was stonework on the inside, they repointed the stone to make it good and strong. I like this picture. Here they are inside the chimney of the original kitchen fireplace doing the work. And this picture shows, I wanted, some electric candles up on the wall. And so they had to find a place where they could put the receptacle in for the electric. And then the wires run up and down and through and around all the stones to get electricity to the lamps. And again, my mother looked at the parlor and she said, Frank Ospitz and she got together. Oh, we could make some beautiful woodwork for this place. Okay, she said, let's do it. So here's the woodwork arriving in. Here's Alan, and he's in the process of, you can see the back of the fireplace mantle that he has put in. The original mantles are back up where they were. And there's the parlor today. The study was they had it decorated like a bedroom in 1976. And I like this picture because when the ceiling fell down, there was a log and it still had all its bark on it. I thought that was so cool. And between the parlor and the study, originally there would have been a wall. And so we put the wall back in, which not only helped put it back to the original, but also this right up here is where that cracked beam was. So this wall helps to support that beam. And here it is today. Here's the hallway in 1941 in our living picture. Here you can see that the walls are still in. And here's where you would walk into the parlor. Over here's where you walked into the dining room. There's the back door. I love that back door. Unfortunately, it was not there in 1976 with that beautiful hinge going across. But here it is in 1976, and this is where you went upstairs to look at the diorama museum. And this sign says adults 85 cents and children 40 cents. So if you walked back the hall to the back door and you turned to the right, you would have been at another door. And if you opened up that door, you could look down into the basement. This is where the Dobbin family actually had access to their basement. So when they needed to get some of those root vegetables, they would just go down on an interior staircase to get them. Of course, you can see we're holding up the house down here. And there is the staircase today. It's amazing to me when I look at this beautiful staircase. This is when it's the Marsh Creek settlement. There's no Gettysburg. There's no Adams County. Most people live in a little log cabin at this time. So the Dobbins were living large, that's for sure. So it's beautiful. Bedrooms. Okay, here's a Lippy picture from 1941 where he decorated it to look like bedrooms. And in 1976, it was the diorama. So here's the platform with all those little soldiers on it. And I love this beautiful tape player of 1976. And they would turn it on, and again, it would tell about the Battle of Gettysburg. But it was getting really out of date, so that's why they put the whole building and everything up for sale. Now, we bought the house for John and Pauline Adamick, who are from Aspers. They took all of these little toy soldiers out of the whole diorama and put it in their barn in Aspers, and it is still there. So maybe someday somebody will get it and put it back together again. That would be really neat. On one side of the bedroom area upstairs, you could sit to watch the museum show, and appropriately on some old pews in a reverend's house that they had. Behind it was a little room that was just a closet space. This is where our, we have some so-called beds right now. And on the other side of the upstairs were more pews and another little room that they used for storage for the gift shop. And there's me standing in that little room. And I like this picture because when we took away that big tape player, I noticed that the woodwork had not been painted. Lots of times you go into a colonial house, they have nice milk paint that they used back in those days, but evidently the Dobbins, at least on the second floor, all the wood was unpainted. And when they took the diorama out, you could see where they had taken out the bedroom walls, which was no more than one board thick. Here the Kraus brothers are reinforcing the floor, which they did throughout the Dobbin House to make sure everything was good and strong. And here it is on the right. Again, everything looks so awful when you're in the middle of the reconstruction. But eventually it looks like this. Yay. And again, it was my mother's idea. I said, we left the walls out up there so we could have large parties. And I said, I don't like this open. My mother said, well, why don't you put in beds? So at the Dobbin House, you can actually have dinner in bed. It's amazing to me how many people come and want to make a reservation to dine in bed. And I have to tell you, one time I was a hostess. I took two couples up to one of the beds, and the one fellow looked at the other fellow and he said, hey Joe, just for tonight, let's swap wives. We have a lot of fun with that. The spinning room, okay, here it is in 1941, the Lippy Museum. We continued this moniker and we have it fashioned as a spinning room today still. But in 1976, it was an apartment. And so here's the sink and a stove and a refrigerator, and they had put in a wall with a door. If you went into that door, you went into the bathroom, complete with a shower. So we took all that out. Again, we found that the original woodwork had not been painted. And it's hard to see in this picture, I know, but there is a shadow of a peg rail. Of course, back in those days, there were no such things as clothes closets because they had so few clothing, didn't need a closet, but they had peg rails up on the wall. Wherever I saw the shadow of a peg rail, we put it back in. So they're exactly where they were originally. And here it is today. Back to one room again. Here's the museum, and in 1976 it was just a storage room. This is above the kitchen area. But it was interesting when we were working on the plaster work that we found that the construction of this addition to the house was what they call brick, wattle and daub. If you go to the Plough Tavern in York, you see the wattle and daub construction. It was very popular at that time. Now the Plough Tavern, they don't even cover it up with plaster. They just have the frame, and then between the frames, they put bricks. And that's how Matthew built this addition here. And here it is today. Now, you will notice, first of all, that I left an architect's window here, because this is the chimney to the fireplace of the big kitchen downstairs. And I wanted people to see that in the colonial days there was no such thing as cement. They only had mud to put between the stones, but they used horsehair to congeal this mud. And so when you look at this into this window, you can see all the horsehair. And then you also will notice that there are some pictures and some documents. While we're doing all this work, for the first time in my life, I walked into the Adams County Historical Society, and there was Dr. Gladfelter. I said, I'd like to know a little bit about the Dobbin House, and he was so wonderful to help me to understand Reverend Dobbin and give me all kinds of documents, of which we made copies, and they are in the museum for people that they can read. On the other side of the room is a little cabinet, and in that cabinet are some artifacts that we found. As we're digging out the tavern, the mud, I kept noticing things in the mud. And so I started digging, and I found all kinds of things from the 18th century, the 19th, and into the 20th century. And I realized that back in the old days, there was no such thing as garbage pickup. If something broke and you didn't want it anymore, you just threw it down into the basement. And so I took some of the items, and we have them on display in the museum for people to see. So here's the outside of the Dobbin House as it looks today. You'll notice I finally had enough money to get rid of that red tin roof and put down shake roof. We had Frank Ospitz get pictures of the original shutters and put them back on. And in 1984, we thought, gee, we'd like to have a big group come in, and all of the Dobbin House rooms are so little. Wouldn't it be nice to have a big room? So we decided to open and build an addition onto the Dobbin House. And you'll notice that it's lower and smaller than the Dobbin House. I wanted the Dobbin House to be the focal point when you looked at all this. So who do I call to build this but the Krause brothers, of course. And you have to understand, the Krause brothers built all of Fantasyland, all over the 20 years it existed. Every time they built something new. They built the house that I grew up in. They did the restoration and the addition on the Dobbin House, and later I worked with them on the GAR Hall downtown. So we have done a lot of things together. But I must say, Don and Alan, they did work on old houses all through Adams County. They also built a lot of new houses. So they have truly left a legacy here in our county today of all the work that they have done. It's remarkable all that they could do. And if you like the Springhouse Tavern down in the basement, believe me, it would have never happened if it wasn't for the Krause brothers. So in the addition, we have the Country Curiosity Store and the ballroom that we're in today. And when we were thinking what we were going to name this new ballroom, I thought, well, there's no place in our area that's named after our county namesake. So let's name it after our President John Adams, who was thought of so well that they named the county after him. And that's why we have the portrait of John Adams and his wife Abigail over the fireplace here. So in 1986, this house next to the Dobbin House came up for sale, and bed and breakfast was just becoming popular. So I thought, oh, that would make a good bed and breakfast building. So we purchased that and needed to transform it into a bed and breakfast. And of course, the Krause brothers did that too. But I didn't know anything about the house. And so again, I went to the Adams County Historical Society and I went to Woody Christ. I said, Woody, I don't have any idea when this house was built. Could you do some research on it for me? When he came back with the most amazing story, I would have never thought this in a million years. It seems that after the Battle of Gettysburg, there were the Gettysburg Memorial Battlefield Association was going around buying land, and they went to Lydia Leicester and said, Lydia, your house was General Meade's headquarters. We'd like to have it. Well, it just so happens that Lydia had built an addition onto her house by that time. And so here's a picture. Here's Meade's headquarters, Lydia's house, and there you can see this addition that she had added about 1870s. Here's another picture of it, again, Meade's headquarters and her addition. So I can only imagine she said, well, yeah, I might sell you the farm, but I really like my new house. And they probably made a deal, well, what if we move the house for you if you'll sell us the farm? Oh, that sounds good. So they moved that house, and this is Lydia Leicester's house that used to be connected to Meade's headquarters. That's just amazing. So of course, we call it the Leicester House today, and we have 5 bed and breakfast rooms in there. Uh-oh, it's not going. We moved forward here. There we go. Oh, so I want to mention that, like Andrew said, we have free Dobbin House tours every week from Easter to Remembrance Day, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday at 10 o'clock. And it's almost getting to be a problem because they're really popular. We have all these little rooms and we have all these people showing up, but I'd love to take folks through the Dobbin House and tell them the history. I always say, you know, there was a Gettysburg before 1863. And Walt Powell wrote a book about the Dobbin House if you want to have a little bit more information. So every Sunday I always do the tours. I have some help on Fridays and Saturdays. But at the end of each tour, I tell everybody that most of the history that I just gave them during the tour, I got from the Adams County Historical Society. Andrew, would you come up here, please? Okay. And then I say, gee, I'm accepting donations. The donations are not for me, and they're not for the Dobbin House. They are for the Adams County Historical Society. So, this year, we collected $1,316 from our tours, and I would like to give it to you. Thank you very much. Thank you to the Historical Society. Like Andrew said, if you are interested in history, and I know you are, you wouldn't be here tonight, I hope that you will consider becoming a member of the society. It has a lot of different programs that have some fascinating history that we know you'll enjoy. And thank you again for your interest and for coming to the Dobbin House. Appreciate it.
And I want everybody to give another round of applause for